Is he alive?
Isaac Clarke. I'm going to show you some images, and I want you to tell me about them.
It was just a shark, but the things in my head. So much shit in my head. What did the symbols whisper?
Where are you going? It's not over between us. You can't be with me forever.
Is he alive?
Isaac Clarke. I'm going to show you some images, and I want you to tell me about them.
It was just a shark, but the things in my head. So much shit in my head. What did the symbols whisper?
Where are you going? It's not over between us. You can't be with me forever.
Is he alive?
Isaac Clarke. I'm going to show you some images, and I want you to tell me about them.
It was just a shark, but the things in my head. So much shit in my head. What did the symbols whisper?
Where are you going? It's not over between us. You can't be with me forever.
Isaac, are you there? Come in, Isaac. Oh, God. I'm so sorry, Isaac. Look at the time difference. I'll call you back later.
It's okay. How you doing?
Good. You're right, Isaac. The Ishimura is a great ship. I am so lucky to be serving aboard her.
Enjoy it while it lasts. You know they're gonna decommission her next year.
Isaac, thank you
For what?
for just pushing me to do this. I mean, if it weren't for you, I never would have made it this far, because you made me stick with it.
I'll just remember, I'm giving you up for 6 months so you can do this.
You know what? We must be getting out of range of their leg. Isaac? Isaac, can you hear me? Look, I'm gonna call you back as soon as I can, okay?
Isaac! You were drifting away for a moment there, Mr. Clark. I believe you were telling me about your nightmares that you've been having. About your dead girlfriend. What was her name?
Nicole.
I didn't want it to end like this. I really wanted to see you again. Just once. I loved you. I always loved you.
Yes. Nicole Brennan. She was a senior medical officer stationed aboard a Planet Cracker-class vessel.
The Ishimura.
USG Ishimura, yes. Part of a mining operation on Aegis 7. I understand communications went down shortly after their arrival. You were part of the repair mission. A mission for which you volunteered, am I right? What did you find aboard that ship, Isaac?
They found something.
What did they find aboard the ship, Isaac?
The marker.
Did you have contact with this marker? It made you see things, didn't it? Things you didn't want to see.
It spoke to me.
What did it say, Isaac? What did it say to you, Isaac? Isaac! Isaac, can you hear me?
Isaac. Isaac, can you hear me? Dana, I found Isaac Clark. Repeat, I have him.
Great work, Franco. Be careful. He's been out a long time.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Good, good. Steady, steady, steady. We gotta get you out of this straitjacket. Where am I? All right, I know you're confused right now. I can explain everything, but you gotta trust me, okay? Listen, you're in terrible, terrible danger.
Franco? Franco, what happened? Oh, God. Isaac! Isaac Clark, if you can hear me, run! Run!
25th century, Earth's resources were ravaged, consumed, exhausted. Desperate and on the verge of extinction, we cast out into the void of space and discovered rich new worlds waiting to be cracked open and stripped bare. All of Earth became devoted to this effort. The planet crackers were built, the USG Ishimura the first and most famous. Planet cracking became routine. Its spoils kept us alive. Eventually, greedy eyes fell upon Aegis 7. Restricted for centuries for reasons unknown, greed and corruption saw to the demise of caution. There, buried beneath the surface, an artifact, the Red Marker, long lost and long forgotten. The religion I once called my own had found its holy grail, the key to human immortality. Or so we thought. It did not bring salvation.
Witness the conviction of a true believer.
It brought doom. Marker bred insanity, murder, and chaos. It bred necromorphs. Those who escaped the planet fled to the safety of the orbiting Ishimura.
This is Shuttle CS-04. The colony's overrun. We can't go back.
The scourge released upon Aegis 7 came with them. Within hours, the Ishimura went dark. The corporation dispatched a small repair crew to check on its investment.
Seems like everyone was trying to pack in a hurry.
Among the crew was an engineer, Isaac Clarke.
Isaac, it's me.
He had something special aboard the Ishimura.
I wish I could talk to you.
In the darkness, Isaac found death. And the Red Marker. It was not holy, it was not alien, it was man-made. And it could be used to stop the outbreak. Isaac also found Nicole.
Thank you, Isaac. I always believed in you.
Dead by her own hand, she was an apparition of the Marker. Isaac engineered his escape. But everything else was destroyed. Three years later, he wakes in a hospital on Titan Station, an EarthGov metropolis on Saturn's largest moon. Isaac has survived, but his mind is no longer safe. For the Marker changes all.
Isaac, are you there? Come in, Isaac. Oh God, I'm so sorry, Isaac. Look at the time difference. I'll call you back later.
It's okay. How you doing?
Good. You're right, Isaac. The Ishimura is a great ship. I am so lucky to be serving aboard her.
Enjoy it while it lasts. You know they're gonna decommission her next year.
Isaac, thank you
For what?
for just pushing me to do this. I mean, if it weren't for you, I never would have made it this far, because you made me stick with it.
I'll just remember, I'm giving you up for 6 months so you can do this.
You know what? We must be getting on a range there tonight. Isaac? Isaac, can you hear me? Look, I'm gonna call you back as soon as I can, okay?
Isaac! You were drifting away for a moment there, Mr. Clark. I believe you were telling me about your nightmares that you've been having. About your dead girlfriend. What was her name?
Nicole.
I didn't want it to end like this. I really wanted to see you again. Just once. I loved you. I always loved you.
Yes. Nicole Brennan. She was a senior medical officer stationed aboard a Planet Cracker-class vessel.
Ishimura.
USG Ishimura, yes. Part of a mining operation on Aegis 7. I understand communications went down shortly after their arrival. You were part of the repair mission. A mission for which you volunteered, am I right? What did you find aboard that ship, Isaac?
They found something.
What did they find aboard the ship, Isaac?
The marker.
Did you have contact with this marker? It made you see things, didn't it? Things you didn't want to see.
It spoke to me.
What did it say, Isaac? What did it say to you, Isaac? Isaac! Isaac, can you hear me?
Isaac.
جيب له حليب ويجلس.
I found Isaac Clarke. Repeat, I heard them. Good, good. Steady, steady, steady. We gotta get you out of this straitjacket. Where am I? Alright, I know you're confused right now. But I can explain everything, but you gotta trust me, okay? Listen.
You should grab them. Isaac, we're all gonna burn for what you did to you.
Clark! Isaac Clark, is that you?
Who are you?
My name is Dana. I'm the one trying to rescue you.
Why? What's going on?
You're suffering from a unique form of dementia, Isaac. Something you contracted on Aegis 7.
How do you know that? How do you know all this about me?
Your dementia will kill you. But if you can get here, I can treat you and get you to safety.
Why should I trust you?
Because I'm not the one shooting at you.
Fuck.
Just follow the route I'm sending you.
Orderly TPS report 1418. The recent realization that the popsicle sticks were being constructed into marker-like miniatures for over a year has led to a search of the unit for any other such phenomena. It appears widespread, with marker forms being made out of medication bottles, hypodermic needles, and even toiletry items like nail clippers and tweezers. The research teams have all been notified of the discovery.
What the hell?
Welcome, CEC engineer Isaac Clark. Access granted.
Isaac, what happened? Are you alright?
Why are you helping me?
If Tideman finds you, more people will die.
Including me.
Not if you follow my route.
I don't like this.
You don't have to like it. Just hurry before you get locked in.
You! Thank God! Please, come help me! Are you a doctor? Can anyone hear me?
Calm down. I'll cut you out of there. Is that a tissue laser? A plasma cutter?
Oh my God!
Fuck.
What the fuck are you doing?
Shit.
Help!
I'm trying. I'm trying.
Isaac, it's Dana. You have to dismember the creatures to stop them.
I know. I've had a lot of practice.
Just try to stay in one piece.
Thanks. Wait! Who is? Who's after us?
Warning. Security lockdown. The hospital bulkheads are closing. Please stand clear.
Isaac! Through here! Come on, Isaac! No. Isaac, remember me. Patient 5. I'm patient 5, remember? Do you remember?
Dana, your fucking route didn't work. There's a security lockdown.
I told you to hurry. How'd you miss it?
Look, I don't need your help.
Fine. Let's see how long you last without it.
Dana! Okay, you're right. I do need your help. Talk to me.
Look, Isaac, we don't have to be friends. But like it or not, we're stuck together. Tideman's your enemy, not me. All right, I found you a new route.
Fine. So where the hell am I? How did another necromorph outbreak get started?
You're on Titan Station orbiting Saturn. As for the outbreak... Shit! Tideman's jamming my signal.
Yeah.
fuck?
Hull breach rectified.
was angry. Dana? I'm out of the hospital.
Okay, the tram station is just beyond the apartment block.
Hang on. I need more answers. How long have I been here?
3 years. Tideman found you floating in space near Aegis 7 and brought you here for study.
Why can't I remember anything?
The marker you found imprinted your brain with a self-replicating signal. The longer you're awake, the more the signal spreads. It's killing you, Isaac. Tideman tried to keep it in check with memory suppressants.
You said you could fix it, right?
Only if you reach me in time. Tram station, get moving.
Listen up. This is Sorensen from CEC. Cut off their limbs. It's the only way they go down. It's their limbs. That's the secret. Comms are down. We can't get a broadcast out, so tell everyone you see.
coming to close. You're not getting in. I'm not opening this door for anyone. I don't care what your security clearance is or what your orders are. I'm armed. I'll fucking kill you if you're trying to get in here. I mean it. Just stay away from the door.
necromorphs everywhere. Is the entire sprawl infected? How'd this happen? The marker was destroyed, Dana. I destroyed it.
You destroyed a marker, Isaac. Tybin built another one.
On this station? Why?
It's powerful alien technology. Tybin wants that power. Get to the tram. It'll take you to the Cassini Towers premises.
Dana? Damn it. I need a new route.
What happened? I thought we lost you.
Unscheduled stop. Where am I?
How did you end up there? Hang on. This won't be the most pleasant route, but it'll get you to the Cassini Towers residential sector. Damn it! Timon has the signal again. Keep moving.
Okay.
You're very important to them, Isaac. Hold tight. I'll contact you soon.
We can't talk. I think they're tracking our signals. Are the memories coming back to you? They're coming back to me. The good ones. And the bad ones. The more I remember, the more my head hurts. I keep seeing the symbols. Do you see the symbols too, Isaac? In him. I keep seeing his face. Shit, found me.
There's this crazy guy that keeps contacting me. I saw him back at the hospital.
Nolan Stross. He was a patient in the project, just like you.
Yeah? Well, why was he there? What does he want?
He's a psychopath, Isaac. Stay clear of him. He murdered his own wife and child.
Okay, I'll be careful. Dana, I thought you were routing me to residential. This looks like a unitology recruitment center. Am I still on track?
Yes. There's an old maintenance access point in there that'll take you through the waste disposal system and into the Cassini Towers. Stay sharp.
Recall this process. Convergence. Imagine.
Whoever sees this, listen up. You can use kinesis to pull blades off dead ones and shoot it back at them. Watch. Watch. I've stayed alive 3 hours using this trick. You see? Just shoot it back at them. I'm gonna bleed out soon. I got clipped pretty bad earlier. So this helps you out. Whoever you are. Okay. Whoever says this.
Diagnostic load initiated for waste compression chamber 752. Compressor piston offline. It is now safe to enter the chamber. Authorized personnel only.
Entering zero gravity.
malfunction. Please replace the power unit to use the elevator.
Soldiers have found them. They're tracking me in some sort of gunship.
You're almost here. Hurry. It's Timon! He's found you! Into the church! Hurry!
Dana, the Church of Unitology? Why here?
It's one of the few places on Titan Station that Tideman can't monitor. Separation of church and state.
No, Dana, we shouldn't be in here. This is the last place we want to be right now.
Isaac! My brother died trying to rescue you. This is important. This will work. I'm in a safe room at the top of the church. Meet me there, okay?
Dana, the Church of Unitology? Why here? It's one of the few places on Titan Station that Tideman can't monitor. Separation of church and state. No, we shouldn't be in here. This is important. This will work. I'm in a safe room at the top of the church. Meet me there, okay?
reported 2 pressure equalization cycles during services last Sunday. The first was minor and only blew some candle flames around, giving Pastor O'Brien a much-needed, if unexpected, boost in his sermon. The second cycle was more harsh, resulting in a pressure snap that popped people's ears and sent several to medical. That was not needed.
showing up on the first page of Google might not be the best for everyone.
After a long hike through the woods, you settle down into your campsite, sipping at a hot cup of tea. But how do you spend the next few hours before nestling into your sleeping bag? Well, you open up this episode of Unexplained Encounters and enjoy over 4 hours of allegedly true scary camping stories. Try to sleep after that. Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Darkness Prevails, and you can follow me on Twitter @DarkPrevails if you want to see the cutest pit bull ever. Enjoy this compilation and be sure to send me your scary stories at darkstories.org so I can narrate them on the show, especially if you have any terrifying experiences as a trucker. And check out eeriecast.com for more free and creepy podcasts like this. Now, let's begin. My great-grandmother's 18th century horror story. From John 343. When many of us think of the 1800s, we tend to think of those cheesy rhinestone cowboy TV shows. We don't consider just how terrifying it truly was to be alive at the time. I was born in 1959. I didn't meet my great-grandmother until I was around 7, so it would have been 1966, I believe. My great-grandmother, who at the time was around 1998, was a very sweet and kind little old lady. She dressed the way that I had seen people dress on Bonanza. So for a young child, a boy especially, who was obsessed with stories of the Wild West that I'd seen on TV, I was excited to flood her with questions. At first, she told me all these wondrous stories of covered wagons, cowboy standoffs, building everything you owned, and just general stories of living in a mostly lawless time. At the time, it was the middle of summer, and my mother had told me to take my dog out to the backyard so he could use the facilities and we could get settled in for the night. Within a few seconds of my mother saying this, my great-grandmother jumped to her feet from her chair and screamed, "No, don't let him go out there." My grandmother walked over to my great-grandmother, putting a hand on her shoulder and whispering something in her ear to settle her down. This was kind of alarming to me, because I didn't really know this woman too well. But being a silly kid, I wrote it off and took Rowdy out to the backyard. When I got back in and locked up, the mood had completely changed. Even though I was going to be allowed to stay up later than normal, my mom told me to take Rowdy and go to bed with her. I questioned her and asked what was going on. I could clearly see my great-grandmother was very disturbed in the other room. My mother said, "Jacob, just go to bed." I was not familiar with her carrying that tone towards me. I laid down after putting my pajamas on and just stared at the ceiling, not really being able to sleep. I headed downstairs to grab a glass of milk, trying to slip a few of the sweets my mother, aunts, and grandmother had made. That's when I saw my great-grandmother sitting there staring out the back window. I asked her, "Grandma Caroline, is everything okay?" She turned around and looked at me, saying, "Do you want to know why I didn't want you to go outside?" I answered, "Yes, please." Believing I was about to hear another Wild West story, I grabbed my sweets cautiously, not knowing what she would say, and sat down for a story. She said, "The reason I didn't want you to go outside is because I didn't want him to get you. I've seen it twice since I've been here, and I won't let it happen again." "What are you talking about, Grandma Caroline?" "The black haint in the woods." "What's a haint?" "Honestly, it can mean a lot of things, but at its core it means something evil." She went on to explain this story to me. "When I was 17 in 1885, I saw it for the first time. My daddy, who was a Civil War veteran, decided to take me, my sisters, and my mama on a little bit of a trip to meet some men he had served with in the war. We would have to set up a camp a couple of times along the way, but we didn't care, because we were too caught up in the excitement of the whole thing. It was in the middle of summer, so we let Mama and Daddy have the tent. Me and my sister slept on blankets and looked up at the stars, just dreaming. On the second night, whenever we were settling in for camp, a family of travelers on their way through the area stopped by, asking if they could share the area for their camp. My daddy was a really good judge of character, and he didn't sense anything wrong. So he said yes, just keep to your own. They made their camp quickly and were asleep almost as fast. I woke up late in the night to see the youngest boy of the group walking towards the woods. At first, I couldn't tell what he was walking towards, but I knew he didn't need to be up and about. I quickly lit a small lantern to run after him and see what was going on, almost afraid I was going to catch him peeing out by the wood line. And that's when I seen it. A tall, dark man with a long trench coat and big hat, like the men that we would see coming through town from time to time, looking to pick a fight or start some trouble. At first, I thought it was a real man and told him to mind his own. Then he looked at me, and that's when I knew this was something evil. His eyes were bright white, and when he smiled, his mouth protruded a bright steam that shouldn't have been coming out of his mouth in the middle of a summer. Before I could even react, he had grabbed the boy, and he was gone. I fainted there. I came to the next morning during a search to find the boy. He was gone, and no one ever found him. I told my daddy about everything that happened. He told me to forget about it, that we were going home right away. I couldn't make sense of anything that happened. After we got home very late the next night, my daddy told us all straight to bed. I tried to lay there and sleep, but couldn't get it off my mind. Then I heard something rustling in the woods. I looked out my window, and I seen it again. That coal-black son of a gun with those white eyes looking directly at me. I rubbed my eyes several times to try to make sure I was awake, and he was still there. I then ran to my mama and daddy's room to get my daddy, and he was gone. But then I noticed the front door was open. I walked to the open door and seen my daddy sitting on the porch with a mouthful of tobacco and a shotgun in his hand. He said to me, "I know what you're seeing, and I've seen it too." It followed me home after the war. I don't know what the heck it is. It's been here for years, baby girl. Go inside. Don't worry about it. I told him I couldn't do that. I decided to sit there next to him. This godless thing stared at us all night, before eventually turning and walking back into the woods before the sun broke. We would sit and watch it, just me and Daddy, almost every night for months, when all of a sudden, he just stopped appearing. Not long after, I met your great-granddaddy, got married, and moved away. I didn't see the man again till the night that your great-great-granddaddy died. He was lying on his deathbed at his and Mama's house. I looked out the window, and just as sure as I was standing there, he was there again. After Daddy died, I didn't see the man again until the night that we pulled up in your driveway. I saw him standing in the bushes beside your house. I don't know what he is, Jacob, and I don't know what he wants. So just make sure you stay in the house after dark, and keep that darn dog in the house too. Needless to say, as of this point, I was far too afraid to go back to sleep. So I just held Rowdy as tight as I could and lay there. The next morning, in little to no sleep, I walked down the stairs to find Great-Grandma Caroline and everybody else laughing and joking as if nothing had ever happened. When I questioned my Great-Grandma Caroline about the conversation that she and I had the night before, she said to me, "I'm sorry, honey. I don't know what you're talking about." But then, a few moments later, she looked at me with a very distinct look and gave me a wink. The rest of Grandma Caroline's visit was uneventful. She left 2 days later, and although she would live to be 102 years old, that was the first and only time I would ever see her. To this day, I find myself looking into the dark to try and see if I can catch a glimpse of whatever this thing is, and I never have. Maybe that's for the best, considering that this thing followed my great-great-grandfather home after the Civil War. I don't want to see it. War is full of death, destruction, and carnage in every way that you could imagine. So I think it kind of goes without saying that war leaves a stain on those who are around it. The Civil War was truly a dark time in American history, and we tend to not want to talk about it too often. We forget the sheer brutality that was fueling this war. Although great-grandma Caroline died peacefully in her home, my Aunt Whitney said her last words were, "I see him standing there." His Guardian Angel, from Bubbleguppy. Ghosts aren't always malefic. Some are downright kind and gentle, just like the one from this experience. This was one of the last times I went camping. It was with my cousin, his girlfriend, and my boyfriend. My cousin is 39, but he was always my favorite, because he always went out of his way for me. For this to make sense, I need to tell you about my former roommate as well. Her name was Alice. She and my cousin were always so sweet together. He was 33 back then, and me and my roommate were both 22 then. Alice and my cousin always joked around with each other, like throwing cold water over her when she was taking a shower, or Alice hiding somewhere and scaring my cousin. But when we'd all watch a movie, Alice would always sit next to him and put her head on his shoulder. Now, my cousin is peculiar when it comes to people putting their head on his shoulder, so you can tell he really cares about someone if he lets them do that. One day we heard that Alice was in a terrible accident. She was taken to the hospital. When we arrived there, her family was sitting in the hallway, and the doctor asked if we were Gabby and Russell, and we answered yes. The doctor said, "She won't make it long, so please make it short."
Dana, you still with me?
When we finally saw Alice, it felt as if my heart stopped. She was wired to so many machines. Alice smiled, though, and stuck out her hand, grabbing Russell's. He sat next to the bed on the stool. I walked to the edge of the bed. She said, "I love you, Gabs," then turned her head to Russell, to which she then grabbed her bracelet, took it off, and put it in Russell's hand, saying, "I love you so much. I wish we could have been together, but I'll always be with you." She ended up passing away right in front of our eyes not too long after. My cousin Russell wears that bracelet every day and only takes it off when taking a shower or a bath or when he goes swimming. He even got a tattoo of Alice's name with angel wings on his right pec on his chest. Fast forward 3 years, my cousin Russell finally had a girlfriend after the death of Alice. Eloise and Russell were an official couple for 3 months at the time, and my boyfriend Eddie and I were together for a full year then. Eddie wanted to go camping with me, and I suggested Russell and Eloise come with us. After all, Eddie and Russell are like 2 peas in a pod when they're together. He of course said yes. The next day, Eloise and Russell showed up with camping equipment. We went to the biggest forest nearby, setting up tents. Then Eddie and Russell began looking for big rocks and wood to make a fire pit. Eloise and I could hear them joking around while looking for the required items. Then Eloise said, "So has Eddie asked you yet?" It was clear that Russell told Eloise that I wanted to get married pretty soon. But before I could answer, Eddie and Russell came back. "Eloise, did you know your boyfriend's crazy?" Eddie said. We saw Russell holding a big pile of rocks. Eloise looked at Russell with a face that just said sarcastically, "Really?" and he dropped the rocks on the ground. As Eloise stood up, Russell walked to her and just kissed her. Eloise then said to me, "Okay, I won't say anything." Later on, Russell cooked the food they'd brought. We sat on the ground starting to tell each other scary stories. After the stories, we went to bed, but since those scary stories tended to get under my skin, I had a bit of trouble sleeping. Those kinds of stories tend to make me kind of paranoid, and I start wondering about things that might happen. Eddie slept with me, and that did help me feel better. He told me not to worry, and I answered back with an "I love you." The next day, I was the first to awake, or at least I thought I was. Eloise then woke up and asked me, "Good morning, have you seen Russell?" "No, I thought I was the first one to wake up, to be honest," I replied. I looked around to see if Russell was anywhere, but I didn't see him. We went on with our morning, assuming that he would come back at some point. But a few hours passed, and I could see Eloise was beginning to get restless. "Where could he be?" she said, worried. I tried to comfort her, saying he probably went out and maybe fell asleep somewhere. She managed to smile, but anyone could see that it was fake. More hours passed, and Eloise finally decided to call the cops. Eventually, a search party was formed. The cops allowed the three of us to join in. A few hours into the search, I saw something glinting in the little sunlight that still shined. I ran up to it and saw it was the bracelet that Alice had given Russell. My heart was pounding. I heard an officer then shout my name, and I put the bracelet into my pocket. "Ma'am, we're gonna have to stop the search now. It's gonna be dark soon, and tomorrow we'll come with the dogs to find him," the officer explained. My heart sank. I was so scared of what could have happened to my cousin. When I arrived back at the campsite, I found Eddie trying to calm Eloise down. She was crying. She never stopped crying until she fell asleep that night. Eddie and I lay in our tent. Then Eddie said to me, "We'll find him, okay? I'm sure he's fine wherever he is." I lay on my back trying to fall asleep, but it was soon clear that I wouldn't be sleeping that night. Eddie was fast asleep though, and I could hear the slight snoring of Eloise coming from the tent next to ours. I picked up the bracelet and held it up, whispering, "Where are you, Russell?" No sooner did I say that, I heard what sounded like a whisper on the wind. I could have swore I heard the words, "Follow me." I got up suddenly and called out, "Hello?" I didn't hear any response, but I did feel the bracelet hit the side of my hand, which was weird since I hadn't moved or touched it, and there was no wind coming through the tent. Then I swear I heard it again. "Follow me." I threw on some clothes, opened up the tent, and stepped out. Then I froze. There was a figure standing in the distance. At that distance, I could not see any features, but I took a step forward, and at this, that figure took a step back, but I didn't hear any footsteps. Once again, I stepped forward, and same as before, the figure stepped back. I gathered my courage and called out, "Who are you?" But I didn't hear a voice in response. Something else happened instead. The bracelet hit the back of my leg, which surprised me. I grabbed the bracelet off the ground. That's when another windy whisper came. "Trust me." My mind was blown. I wasn't sure if it was even real, what I was hearing. Alice had always said that to me when I was afraid. My mouth agape, I then swallowed and gathered my courage again. I spoke. "Alice, is that you?" Then I heard a giggle, and I smiled when that giggle sounded familiar. There was no mistaking it. That had to be Alice. Was she here to help? I began walking toward the figure, which I was now sure was my darling departed friend, Alice. I followed her, trying to ask her questions like, "Where are you taking me?" But all I got was giggles until she stood still, and so did I. "Come," I heard her voice say. Steadily, I walked up closer to the figure, and as I drew closer, it became clear to me. This figure truly was Alice. I felt a tear roll down my cheek, seeing her standing in front of me after all this time. She then turned her face to the left. "There," she said. I walked over to where she was looking. After a few steps, I noticed a hole in the ground. I shouted, "Hello," into the hole. Suddenly, I was greeted by another familiar voice. "Gabs, is that you?" I was both relieved and startled. I shouted back, My God, Russell, are you okay? What happened? He replied, I fell down here, hurt my ankle pretty bad. I can't even stand on it, but you need to help me out of this hole. I put the bracelet into my pocket, putting my hand into the hole. Russell was just barely able to reach it, and I managed to help Russell out of the hole. He looked at me, and he asked, How did you find me, Gabs? I grabbed the bracelet out of my pocket, showing it to him. Guess who? He smiled and said, It was Alice? I smiled back. I think so. I think I saw her, and she led me to you. Suddenly, a gentle breeze picked up only for a moment, and I heard what sounded like, I love you. I turned to Russell, asking, Did you hear that? He was smiling, just looking right in front of him. We walked back to the campsite as I supported him on his hurt ankle. Halfway there, the sun began to rise. I asked, How did you even end up in that hole? Well, I was picking up wood to start the breakfast fire. I ran into a boar of all things. I just started running away from it blindly. I looked him straight in the eye, and he put on his I did something stupid smile and continued. The boar chased me. I was zigzagging through the trees, but it kept on running after me. I ran through a few branches. That's probably how I lost the bracelet in the first place. I just kept running. A big ray of early morning sunlight was now shining through the trees, creating a breathtaking scene in front of us. Russell and I just sighed, looking at each other. I smiled and hugged him. Then Russell said, Alice loved to see the sunlight through the trees like this so much. Then one final time, the whisper on the wind came to us. Thank you. The two of us quickly turned around, and we saw her standing there, looking back at us. Then we heard Eloise shout behind us. We turned to her and saw her running at us. She threw her arms around Russell, crying her eyes out. Eddie hugged me, saying, My God, where were you? And where'd you find him? We told them how I found Russell, except for the parts where Alice helped. To this day, Russell still wears the bracelet, and even calls his first daughter, who is now 1 year and 7 months old, Alice. When she's old enough, Russell's going to have his daughter wear the bracelet, and have Alice be her guardian angel. Campfire Creatures from Quinn. Back in high school, me and some friends decided to go camping late at night without our parents' permission. When they'd first mentioned to me that they wanted to go, something seemed off about my friends' possible intentions. Just to let you know, my friends were not particularly religious people. They'd tried to perform many rituals in the school bathroom, but were soon caught due to publicity. Their parents, though, were strangely strict Catholics, and fortunately had never found out about their children's behaviors. Now back to the story. On a Friday night, me and my 4 friends snuck out at a sleepover to go to the nearby woods. They tried to hide it from me, but it was very obvious they brought stuff to start a cult. You know, some ritualistic kind of stuff. I didn't mind it at first, though. I could have always went to take a leak while they did this. Once we arrived in the circle of trees, they got out the salt and the candles. I excused myself abruptly, starting in a random direction, but before I could take even 2 steps away, I felt 2 pairs of hands grab me by the waist and pull me back. I looked behind me to see my 4 friends, all grinning while dragging me toward the fire. I screamed, thrashed around to break free, but their grips were too tight. Before I knew it, I felt the heat surrounding my entire body. As I thought I was about to die, my friends suddenly became weak and loosened their grips. Even though I was held over the fire, I managed to flee and made it about 8 feet away from there before turning around and seeing no one. It was as if my supposed friends had just vanished. I have no idea what happened. Was it actually them? Was it a prank? Who knows? I sure don't. What was outside my tent? From Veronica W. I'm a 17-year-old girl living in southeast Pennsylvania. But this happened just last summer while I was 16. I'd gotten a job at a scout summer camp, and I'd already worked there for 2 weeks. One night I'd been chilling with a friend, let's call him Will, when someone walked past and told him, "Hey, I saw the Wendigo tonight." I glanced at Will. What's he mean? Will looked at me. It's supposedly this creature that's been spotted a few times over at the OA village. It's about 9 to 10 feet tall, covered in some type of white fur. Almost looks like some kind of bipedal deer man thing. They say it runs real fast too. People who have seen it usually run away, but the thing ends up just running into the woods. It's like it's afraid of people. I was pretty sure this was a joke that the older staff told, because the way the other guy casually walked up and talked about it. But I'm easily scared and I didn't dare go to my tent alone. The female staff campsite was the closest to the sighting spot, but I soon forgot about it as we moved into camper week 4. It was the first night of week 4 that things happened. My troop had said goodnight, and each went to their tent. My tent was on a trail leading out of the campsite, and farthest from the group. I fell asleep, and I stayed asleep for a few hours. But then I awoke, and all I could hear was this steady breathing sound, as if something had sat down next to me just outside the tent. I stiffened, panic filling my mind. I dared not move, otherwise I'd risk alerting it. But I wanted the adults nearby to help. I didn't know what to do. I even held my breath, making sure that I wasn't just hearing myself. But it was still there. Forcing myself to stay awake, nearly drifting in and out of consciousness, I waited till sunrise, and that thing stayed there until morning. When I stopped hearing it breathing, I waited for the others to wake up. Then I pulled on my clothes and dashed out of the tent. They were surprised to see me as one of the first up. I recalled what happened to another scout, who told me, "Well, I had to use the bathroom last night. My mom came with me, and when we walked by your tent, we both heard a noise on the way back." My heart sank. I asked, "Did you investigate?" They shook their heads. I knew I couldn't sleep in that tent again, so I moved into my dad's equipment tent. Nothing else happened until week 6. I was with the staff again, and I enjoyed staying up talking to Will. But soon we walked to the bathrooms and parted ways. I'd usually find another girl going to the campsite, but that night I didn't. Nervously, I put my earbuds in, playing some music that made me feel brave. I traveled down the hill and glanced over at a climbing tower nearby. Its floodlight illuminated a rather large shape. This shape was backlit and hunched over, walking towards the shooting range. The shape was like a giant beetle. I could see that it had fur. It was on all fours, and it was about 5 feet tall. I could tell because the fence behind it was the same height. Panicking, I froze, watching this thing walking away from me. Once I couldn't discern its shape anymore, I sprinted to my tent. This time no one believed me that the creature they joked about, I saw. Granted, I hadn't seen it very well. They tried to reassure me that it was just someone else. I was on edge the rest of the time I was at the camp. Since that day, I've been researching what creature it is. The closest I've gotten to is a werewolf, but it's still not exact. I'm going back there this year to find out more, and hopefully I don't die for knowing too much. I was followed by something for 4 years. From Theolite Faye. These events happened when I was between 11 and 15 years old. I had never been one to fully believe in the paranormal, but I do accept that even if I haven't seen something strange myself, it's probably out there somewhere, waiting for me to run into it. This was one of those experiences. The first encounter I had with this entity was when I was 11 years old. I was living in the Southwest United States. My friend, his dad, my dad, and I were doing an overnight campout in one of our favorite camping spots, which was located a little ways from a relatively calm river. It was secluded, but close enough to public roads we could leave quickly if we needed to. The day went smoothly, and we settled into sleep after a good hike along the river. I shared a tent with my friend, while our fathers shared another. Sleeping on campouts has always been difficult for me, so I was the last one to fall asleep. I think I fell asleep sometime around 11 p.m. I woke up in the middle of the night, suddenly. I looked at my watch. It said 2 a.m. Right away I wondered why I was awake. That's when I heard something moving around outside the tent. No problem, I thought. It's just my father or my friend's father moving around. Probably had to go relieve themselves. That thought was quickly wiped from my mind, however, as I heard the movement continue with no sound of a tent zipper or tent fabric. Naturally, as an 11-year-old with an overactive imagination, I quickly hunkered down into my sleeping bag, terrified of what it could be. That's when the entity yipped. If you're familiar with coyotes, you know they don't really howl, but they let out a series of yips and whines. This was the sound the entity made, and continued to make. A series of yips and whines followed by snuffling and more movement around the tent. Surprisingly, my friend did not wake up, nor did I hear anyone stirring about in the other tent.
You got that right.
Whatever this thing was, it was snuffling and walking right next to the tent wall, occasionally yipping loudly. Normally, when coyotes make these calls, they're answered by other coyotes. But nothing else responded to this thing's calls or whines. Eventually, the sounds stopped though, and at some point I managed to fall asleep.
Ellie.
The next morning, I was the first one up and out of the tent. I had to see if I could find anything that would show there was a coyote outside of the tent the previous night. I looked for anything I could think of. Paw prints, shed hair, even scat. But there was nothing within a 100-foot radius of our campsite. Not even paw prints in the soft soil near the tent, nor in the sand on the riverbank. When I asked my friend and our fathers if they had heard anything the previous night, they all replied that they had slept soundly, and they hadn't heard a thing. After another search, none of us found anything coyote-related either, though my friend did find a human footprint in the sand along the riverbank. No, it wasn't a shoe print. It was a bare human footprint. We packed up camp and left after breakfast, and nothing else of note happened. A day later, however, there was a massive summer storm. The river near the campsite flooded, completely wiping out the spot where we had camped 2 days prior. At the time, I thought this was simply a coincidence. However, my second experience with this entity changed my mind. The second experience with this thing happened about a year after the first. I was 12 years old then, still living in the same area. It was another summer night, and I'd taken to sleeping on the covered balcony of our house, where I could use the night breeze to stay cool. I'd gone to bed early that night, tired after a long day outside. But I woke up in the middle of the night, around 1 a.m. I felt very uneasy for some reason. That's when I heard the yipping again, that familiar yipping. And once again, it had no responses and no other calls, just that solitary yipping of what should have been a single coyote. This time, however, I decided I wanted to see what was out there for myself before it had a chance to disappear. The balcony faced the front of the house, thankfully in the same direction as that yipping. I looked out of the wire screen that covered the balcony window in the direction of the sounds and where I assumed the entity would be. What I saw was anything but a coyote. It crouched on 2 legs, and from my vantage point, I could roughly guess it was about the size of a grown man, hunched over. In the darkness, I couldn't make out anything beyond the rough humanoid shape of the entity. It never looked up towards the balcony window, just shambled along before disappearing behind a row of houses, yipping every so often. That night, I wasn't able to go back to sleep. The following day was miserably wet and stormy. These weather conditions were nearly identical to that of the storm after the previous encounter. I didn't have another encounter for another 3 years after that. My final encounter with this entity happened when I was 15. I say final encounter, but for all I know, this creature is still out there, still following me. Anyway, by this time I was living in the Pacific Northwest of the United States. One day I'd gotten off the bus and I was walking back towards my house when I noticed movement at the edge of the road on the opposite side of where I stood. When I looked up, I locked eyes with a coyote. Normally, from my experience, wild animals avoid eye contact as much as possible, and making eye contact is typically a surefire way to agitate them. Quickly, I broke eye contact, still keeping an eye on the animal, but my gaze kept coming back to its eyes. They looked like a normal coyote's eyes, but there was something more than just the regular canine intelligence in them. The coyote stared at me, unmoving, for what seemed like hours, but was only a few minutes, before it turned around and loped off away from the road. I waited until I couldn't see it anymore, before I started walking again, heading home. That night, there was a thunderstorm that shook the house violently with every thunderclap, and the wind was strong enough to push the trees that sat behind our house to their breaking point. When I woke up the next morning, I found that a tree had fallen diagonally across our yard, missing the corner of the house where my bedroom was by only a few feet. To this day, I still don't know if the entity I encountered was anything strange, or if it was just a string of bizarre coincidences. Anyone who knows about coyotes knows they live pretty much everywhere in the United States, so they're not uncommon. But I know what I saw, and I don't think the storms after every encounter are just coincidences. Was this entity trying to warn me? Was it bringing the storms with it? Some part of me wants to meet this entity again, no matter what it might be, just so I can get some sort of closure, get closer to figuring out what it was. I don't think I'll ever know, but to this day, whenever I hear a coyote call, I immediately associate it with the sound and smell of rain. I stared death in the eyes. From Anonymous. This happened 13 years ago. I was 33, living alone in Montana. I am a hunter, like my father and his father, so I've had my experiences with animals. On the morning in question, I planned to go on a camping trip by myself. The spot I'd planned to go to was deep into the woods at a remote campsite. I drank a mug of coffee, packed my bags, and grabbed my belt, which had a .500 Magnum in its holster. I called my brother and asked him to come pick up my dog and take her back to his place. Then I was on my way. Nothing much happened on the drive there, although when I got to the trail, everything was silent. I assumed it was because I just pulled in, so I continued to the path. The entire hike, I never heard a bird, a bug, or even the rustling of branches. It was all just silence. After around 2 hours of this, I was officially on edge. I kept my hand on my gun because honestly, I felt as if I was being stalked by some kind of predator. After 3 hours of my hike, I came to the campsite. As I was setting up my tent, the sounds of nature resumed, and I felt relieved. To say this campsite was beautiful would be an understatement. It was on a ridge overlooking the small town I lived in. I threw my bag in the tent, and I began to unpack. Suddenly, all at once, everything went silent again. It wasn't quiet for long. The silence was soon broken by the sounds of the trees knocking against each other in the wind. I set up my sleeping bag, and when I left the tent, I took a can of beans out of my food bag, then put the rest in a tree. That's when I heard a twig snap around 20 feet into the woods. I turned around, my hand on my gun, and watched the forest. Still and unmoving, I saw nothing. I sighed and shrugged my shoulders, trying to relieve some tension. As I tried to start a fire to cook my food, I heard rustling, followed by frantic but massive footsteps. I pulled out my gun, and once again, I turned around. The iron sights were aimed at the center mass of what I can only describe was a demon. What I was looking at had the legs and horns of a goat and stood on 2 feet. It had a brown, hairy body and human-looking arms. But I swear, its face was like that of a kangaroo, and its eyes emanated pure malice. It inched closer to me from the woods, and I fired a shot into the air, trying to scare it. In response to that, the creature screamed, sounding more like a fox, a deer's mating call, and the most painful, blood-curdling human scream I'd ever heard, all mixed into one. I blinked, and the thing was soon right in front of me. Its snout was nearly touching me. Those yellow, almost lizard-like eyes were stabbing right into my soul. I felt that if I moved, it would kill me. I don't know how. It was this feeling that dominated me. I slowed my breathing, and as I did, the creature pushed me to the ground. Without breaking eye contact, I jumped back up and stood there. It came up to me again and screamed. This scream seemed to shake the entire forest. In response, I threw my hands up and screamed back. It just kept staring at me, toying with me. I put my gun directly to its throat and screamed again, "Back off!" It still stood there, so I pulled the trigger. As my ears rang, I screamed again, and I watched the creature run back into the woods. I began to quickly pack up my things, and whenever I looked up, I saw it, staring at me, now from a distance. This terrifying thing followed me down the path all the way to my motorcycle. I sped out of there, at least going 30 miles per hour over the speed limit. I heard it scream one last time as I got onto the main road that leads to the town I live in. To be truthful with you, something in me wants me to go back. I want to see if I can kill that thing, hang its head on my mantle. But I do not think it would end well. Now I've got a wife and 2 kids, and I can't afford to just throw my life away hunting some forest demon. Something in the Corn. From Anonymous. This story takes place in the summer of 2012. I was 13 years old at the time. I lived out in the country in a small farm town in central Illinois. Our home was surrounded by tall cornfields all summer long, until it was time for harvest. The corn never really bothered me, considering I'd grown up around it my whole life. But this summer was different. I was the only one of my friends who lived in the country, so naturally, they would always want to come to my house because there was more for us kids to do. I'd always been the outdoorsy type, and so was my best friend Max. During that particular summer, Max was over at my house a lot. We would do things like walk down to the creek and do some fishing.
I knew it was only a matter of time before you reached the transit hub. You would find the train inoperable.
Are you insane? You cut off power to life support. There may be other survivors over here.
Public sector is already beyond acceptable recovery conditions. I can't allow you to escape. Goodbye, Clark.
fishing, go swimming in our pool, have bonfires, build shelters out in the back, and usually, when it got dark, we'd go inside into my room and play video games. This particular time I'm talking about was different. We decided to do something we didn't normally do. That weekend, we would camp in the backyard with our little two-person tent and a small fire pit. My parents' property was not huge, but it did have a decent-sized backyard and loads of trees. Since we were too young to do any real camping, this was our only option. This way, we could pretend the backyard was the forest, and if anything went wrong or we got scared, we could just walk up the property to the house and give up if we felt like it. Not that we planned on doing that, though. That evening, after setting up our little campsite and cooking some food over the fire, we eventually got tired and decided to go to bed early. Usually, I would be too creeped out to do this by myself, but my buddy Max was with me, and I also had my dog, who, funnily enough, was also named Max. Confusing, right? Anyway, we were in the backyard. Now, my parents' bedroom had a large sliding glass door and balcony that came off the back of the house, so I knew my parents would occasionally peer out to check on us throughout the night. This gave me a bit of comfort. Once in the tent, we lay down in our sleeping bags to get comfortable. My dog stayed outside the tent and roamed the yard as he normally did. He was an outside dog, after all. I don't remember much after that, not until the weirdness went down. Once we fell asleep, we must have stayed asleep for a good while. I don't remember really waking up much or tossing and turning. Then again, this was years ago, so small details like that are far from my mind. Now this is where the creepiness takes place. Randomly, I just woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of my dog barking hysterically. His barks sounded mean and vicious. He was not happy about whatever he saw, which wasn't like him at all. My dog was usually a gentle boy. He rarely barked at cars or strangers as it was, so this really caught me off guard. As I slowly woke up and rubbed my eyes, I noticed what my dog was barking at, even from the tent. Because I didn't see it, I heard it. Some strange erratic whistling seemed to be coming from no particular direction. It was so loud, too. It was definitely human whistling. No animal sounds like this. At least, not to my knowledge. It was such a weird whistle, although human, it didn't have any specific rhythm or pattern to it. It was just so odd sounding. If I had to guess, this whistling sounded as if it was a beckoning call, most likely for my dog. Honestly, even though this could have been my dad pulling a prank, it freaked me out pretty bad in that moment. However, it only got much worse. I promptly woke up my buddy Max. It took many shakes and shouts to finally get him to wake up. But once he did, I didn't even have to say a word. He heard the whistling immediately, and we both looked at each other in silent terror. My second instinct after waking my buddy up was to check my phone. It was 3 a.m. That's the witching hour, according to some. Me, being a believer in the supernatural, knew this, as did my buddy. I didn't even have to say anything. I just showed him the time, and he looked at me even more freaked out. "What is that?" Max asked. "I don't know, dude," I replied. Max suggested I call my dad to see if it was him doing all that whistling. So I did. The phone rang about 3 times, and finally my dad picked up the phone, sounding groggy. He asked, "What, son? I'm trying to sleep." To my horror, even as my dad spoke through the phone, the whistling never stopped, nor did the barking. I knew then it couldn't be my dad. I asked if my mom was in bed with him. To this, he replied, "Yes, why?" "Dad, there's somebody on our property whistling, and the dog's barking like crazy. we're really scared." All my dad said was, "It's probably a bird." I was angry that he was so quick to shut me down, not even trying to listen for himself. "Come back to the house then. What do you want me to do?" I hung up then. He wasn't going to help us. If we stayed out here, that meant possibly dealing with whatever that thing or person is. I told my buddy we had to book it back to the house, to which he replied, "Well, let's go then, hurry. I'm not staying out here." So I unzipped the tent as fast as I could, and we both went sprinting quickly back to the house. As we ran, I finally could tell what direction the whistling was coming from. It was coming from the west side of the property, from the cornfields. I didn't dare look in that direction. I just ran. As we got to the back door, I finally saw my dog. He was still barking in that general direction. He was close against the house, keeping his distance from that thing. I swung the door open, and we got inside as fast as we could. For a few seconds, I stood at the door, calling for my dog to come back in the house with us. He wouldn't listen, though. He just kept barking. After getting frustrated and fearful for his life, I ran out to grab him by his collar so I could drag him inside myself. Just as I did this, the whistling seemed to get closer. This thing was coming in closer towards us. As I reached my dog, he suddenly decided to bolt past me and towards whatever that thing was in a violent manner. Whatever it was, my dog was now full sprint after this thing, chasing it. I yelled his name once more before slamming the back door and locking it. I was afraid my dog would be attacked or possibly killed, but we had to save ourselves. As we got into the safety of the house, we made sure all the doors were locked. My dad came down then to talk to us, and we explained to him what happened. For some reason, my dad seemed to think it was ridiculous and that we had imagined the whole thing. Of course, this made us furious. "Go listen then," we encouraged him. We watched as my dad went over to a window and opened it up to listen outside. Nothing. The noises had stopped. No whistling, no barking. My dad, thinking that he proved his point, went back to bed, suggesting that we do the same. But we couldn't. We were terrified. We were worried about my dog, too. We decided to go online, looking up noises that might match what we heard. But nothing at all sounded like it. At a certain point, we finally decided to rationalize for the sake of falling asleep that night. We just told ourselves it was some coyotes. But we knew it wasn't that, deep down. The following day, my parents went off to work. Max and I were there home alone, and we decided to go out looking for my dog. Almost immediately after going outside, we found him. He was running around, happy as ever, looking totally normal. No injuries whatsoever. We decided whatever it was, we must have chased it off. Being a lot less afraid now, and it being daytime, and that thing seeming to be gone, we pulled out the dirt bikes from the garage and went riding around the property. Everything was going great until I came around the corner on one of our usual routes. I saw my friend Max stopped in the middle of the track. He was still on his bike, but it was turned off now, and he signaled for me to do the same. I shut off my engine, and I asked him what was wrong. To this, he looked at me with big eyes. I heard it again, he said, and he pointed at the nearby cornfield. I thought he was messing with me, but I could tell after my second time asking him about this, he wasn't. He was truly terrified, and now so was I. Needless to say, we spent the rest of the day indoors. I never did see the thing, only heard it, but I think maybe that's for the best. I'm 23 now. I've got a wife and daughter, and I don't live there anymore. So I've never heard it again. Not even the rest of the time I lived there before moving out. I hope I never do hear it again, to be honest. I thought it was a deer. From Anonymous. I've always been a lover of the paranormal and supernatural. It's been a special interest of mine. It's something I've poured my heart into, and I've spent hours researching to learn more about. Now, when I was in 6th grade, we had an essay to write. We could do anything we wanted, just so long as we did research, and told a lot on the topic. My classmates went with stories of fishing or making things. You know, normal 6th grade topics. I, of course, went the supernatural route. I chose to research skinwalkers. Ever since seeing an episode of a paranormal investigative show where they went to Skinwalker Canyon, I'd been amazed by the idea of these creatures. I spent hours looking into folklore, learning all I could. My final essay ended up being around 12 pages long, and I was incredibly proud. My classmates thought it was a little weird of me to do this, and some teachers were worried, but it never ended up causing me any trouble. It was rather ironic that I chose this for my essay, seeing as how the information I learned did nothing to help me realize what happened to me that July. The summer between 6th and 7th grade, we were moving houses. We weren't going very far, just about 15 minutes away, so we could be closer to my grandmother. The house we lived in at the time was surrounded by dense woods, which my younger brother and I had always spent much of our time in. We didn't have much property, but we did have a nice area of the forest to run around in and explore. We knew almost every square inch of the land. Back then, I loved the outdoors, and I would play out there for hours at a time. I felt comfortable out there, especially when I had my dogs with me. My house sat on a very small hill, and we had a small porch on the backside, looking out into the woods. It was just big enough to hold our grill, or maybe a few camping chairs, and I would often stand out there at dusk, listening to the sounds of the forest at night. The tree line was about 20 yards away from there, and the angle made it so whoever was on the porch would be a good 6 or 7 feet above the ground at the tree line. One night in July, I was standing out there as usual. I'd been sitting there, reading one of my favorite books, and just relaxing. I was around 12 years old at the time, and I had a very short attention span. Once I was done reading, I got to my feet and leaned against the railing, looking out into the trees. After a few moments, I realized I could hear something walking around in the woods. Since we lived so close to the forest, we often got deer that walked through, sometimes coming right up to our house if we were silent enough. Naturally, I went quiet, waiting for a deer to come out of the bushes. Sure enough, after about 30 seconds, I saw a pale, slender shape stepping out from the brush. There was a brief moment of excitement to see such a pretty creature before my enthusiasm was replaced by confusion. This deer didn't look quite right. Its neck was just a little too long, and its limbs seemed thin and spindly. It shouldn't be able to stand on legs that thin. Surely it would have collapsed from the weight of its own body. But somehow, it was perfectly steady on its hooves as it walked towards me. I felt no fear yet, just confusion and fascination. As it got closer and closer, I realized that no deer should be this close to a human being. It looked directly at me, and I knew it was aware of my presence. With the thrill of terror, I realized maybe this deer had rabies or was sick. There was no way the deer could get on the porch with me, but I still slowly backed away from the railing, going inside and locking the door behind me. I thought about it for a moment, then shrugged it off, deciding this was just a sick deer. I told my mother about the deer, worried for our dogs or my brother. I didn't want them to get attacked by it, or possibly get whatever made that deer sick. My mother immediately went on alert and kept my brother and the dogs inside for the next few days. We moved away that week, though it wasn't related to the sighting of the sickly animal. I never saw that deer again or another one like it. It's been several years since the encounter, and I'd forgotten about it until a few nights ago. My interest in the paranormal has remained with me, and I've continued to look into these creatures. I was searching through the cryptid tags on an app, and I found videos of creatures called not deer. Immediately interested, I searched up these beings, and after looking at the information for a few moments, the memories of that night in July came back to me. It was starting to make sense to me. The deer's appearance and behavior perfectly matched the stereotypical behavior of not deer. The story that I thought I made up with my 12-year-old imagination had actually been true. I was rather embarrassed for not realizing what this creature was until all these years later, considering how much I'd looked into these folklore beings. However, I decided to ignore the embarrassment and share my story instead. If I see another creature like this, I'll be sure to share more. In the days since realizing what my encounter was, I found myself looking into the woods more, wondering if I'll see a pair of big eyes staring back. Don't visit Pripyat. From Silver Bullet 54. In 2020, I went to Europe with 4 friends. We chose to visit the Ukrainian town of Pripyat. Before we went, we made sure to get clearance and also get Geiger counters to make sure we were in a safe zone. We figured one day in couldn't hurt, as long as we stayed together. So we decided that we would explore, camp, pack up, and leave. Sadly, I wish it had been that easy. When we first arrived, my friend Kevin mentioned how silent and eerie it was. We saw the clocks at 11:55, then saw the abandoned amusement park. Mid-ride bumper cars, a creaking Ferris wheel, and an uncanny stillness was all that was left. It was like a giant void had opened up and sucked away all the people that once lived here. Our counters were showing very low levels of radiation, which was a good sign. But we knew if any of us began feeling strange, we were to book it out of there immediately. Now, a friend of mine, Brandon, had mentioned that the animals around here had been horribly affected. And believe it or not, we saw a wolf skulking around the area alone. We kept our distance and watched it, and when it turned towards us, we quickly averted our eyes to avoid challenging it. But when I happened to glance towards it for one moment, I saw just what was wrong with its eyes. Now, I'm no scientist or zoologist, so I don't know if the radiation caused it, but the wolf's eyes had gone completely white. I couldn't tell the cornea, iris, and pupil apart. Even though I figured it was blind, it was clearly sniffing around, so I'm sure it could have smelled us. Fortunately, he seemed to sense 5 scents and left without attacking. Brandon then said, "Let's go set up camp in one of those buildings. I'm not sure what it is, but I feel like something doesn't want us here." The other 3 were feeling uneasy as well, and I was still on edge after that wolf encounter. We all soon found an empty building with very little radiation and a roof to sleep under. I won't forget what happened next, though. Before I go on, I'll tell you now that I suffered no headaches, I did not feel lightheaded, and I had experienced no nausea, vomiting, or any other ill effects. So the radioactivity wasn't what caused this, it wasn't a hallucination. I woke up with a start when I heard a weird moaning sound. It was like a lawnmower that was about to die. I was about to ask anyone else in the group if they heard that, but all four were already sitting up and listening. Okay, I said. We can all confirm we just heard that. Brandon swallowed and replied, I think I know what doesn't want us here. He then pointed behind my friend Grant. We all looked and screamed like we were trying to raise the dead. There stood a person. They were about 6.5 feet tall with bead red skin. They had 2 completely red eyes, and what appeared to be a new, vestigial, deformed limb protruding from their left arm. I then asked, does radiation even do that? The other 4 just ran with their things, and I quickly followed. When I looked back, the man was just standing there, swaying and groaning as if he couldn't control his own movements and behavior. As soon as we got back home, Brandon left to see his parents, while Grant and I confirmed that what we saw was a possible victim of radiation. Kevin and Maria, the other 2, refused to talk about it, and I never brought this up again until now. So if you go to Pripyat, I suggest you keep your eyes and ears open. The radiation is still there, and some people either couldn't or wouldn't leave. You might run into an unfortunate radiation victim. So in all honesty, maybe it's not the best place to go. You can pay in the morning. From Mrs. Trash Panda. This is a story from my grandparents and my aunt. When my family goes camping, my grandpa can sleep anywhere, literally. But the second he tells you to pack it up and get out of there, you listen. You pack your things and you get back in the car. If I recall correctly, my grandparents and my aunt, who was around 7 or 8 at the time, were on their way down to Tennessee to pick up my mom and uncle, who had gone down there with friends for a vacation. While it was getting late into the afternoon, my grandparents pulled into a gas station up in the mountains of Tennessee. As a side note, I think it was somewhere near Gatlinburg. They like to sightsee a lot, so it wasn't unusual for them to go out of their way during a trip. They asked if there was a campground nearby, so they could sleep for the night. The lady at the counter of the gas station told them there was a gated campground about 5 miles down the road. Of course, my grandpa said okay, and drove down those 5 miles. At this point, my grandma was getting very uneasy. She asked my grandpa if he was sure this is where they wanted to stay. He said yes. I'd assume he was probably tired of driving at that point, and didn't mind where they stayed. They pulled up to the gate, and it was closed. There was a sign up that said, "Welcome, help yourself, and you can pay at the office in the morning." My grandpa had my grandma get out and open the gate. He pulled the camper through, and my grandma closed the gate back up. She got in the truck, and they drove down a huge hill. When they made it to the bottom, they found a campsite and parked the camper and started to get things ready for the evening. Now, this is the part that turned the whole trip for them into something ominous. As my grandma got everything set up and started cooking dinner, she looked up and she saw my aunt playing around outside while my grandpa was pacing up and down the length of the campsite. She said he just kept mumbling to himself. Finally, he grabbed my aunt, put her in the camper, and told my grandma in a panicked voice to stop and pack everything up. He said they needed to leave immediately. Of course, this confused my grandma, but she listened anyway and packed things up. She got my aunt and everything settled back in. My grandma asked my grandpa what was going on, and he replied, "We can't sleep here. We have to leave." So he started the truck up and basically floored it up the huge hill with the camper. They came up to the gate again, and my grandma had to once again get out to open and close it. After that, they drove for about an hour before finally stopping at a very well-lit truck stop. The next day, when they reached their destination, they told their friends that they had stopped at this campground that was gated. I guess this shook my grandpa because when one of their friends exclaimed that people had gone missing in that exact area, my grandpa began thanking God for having the instincts he had. When they got home to Michigan, they'd found out that over the past 2 weeks alone, 8 people had gone missing from that exact area, and they had nearly stayed the night there. Thank God my grandpa had a bad feeling and listened to it. My experience with the Wendigo, from Love Malfoy 5858. I live in New Jersey. This took place when I was around 10 or 12. Our school had organized a camping trip to the Bass River State Forest. Of course, being the adventurous kid I was, I instantly signed up. The day on which the trip was organized was in the winter, so we bundled up in cozy winter clothes before going on the 3-day camping trip. The trip started like any other. We got on the bus, teachers assigned us in groups, and all that stuff. We got off the bus with our camping gear and immediately sat to work. While we worked, however, I had this strange feeling that I was being watched. I brushed it off, thinking there's nothing wrong with that. There's lots of animals out here after all. As soon as I had this thought, a howl of some sort resounded from the woods all around me. Startled, I dropped the hammer I was holding 2 hammer pegs. The noise had startled me, as even though my friend said it was nothing, it sounded more human than animal, but with still some traces of wolf in it. It's hard to explain, it was so bizarre. I pushed the occurrence to the back of my mind, and I tried to enjoy the trip. Nothing besides that really happened on the first day. On the evening of the second day, we all lit a fire as it was cold. We were having a really good time, toasting marshmallows and singing songs. A few hours passed and the fire began to dwindle. We all went out in different directions in the woods to cover more ground, searching for more kindling. I had chosen to go through the most scary-looking part of the forest, as, like I said, I was adventurous. I had been picking up sticks for nearly 10 minutes before realizing the forest was quiet. Too quiet. This silence was deafening. I suddenly heard a twig snap near the tree line. I jumped in shock and looked around for the source of the noise. I called out to see if anyone was there, but then my voice seemed to echo. Anybody there? I say this because my echo sounded much more disturbing, much more inhuman. I got scared, dropping all the sticks I was carrying, and ran for my life. Behind me, I could hear twigs snapping. I never felt so terrified. I ran for a few minutes, and the twig snapping seemed to have stopped. I turned back to see. That was a big mistake. What I saw will be forever etched into my mind. A huge wolf, standing on 2 legs with what appeared to be antlers, was looking down at me, and I swear it looked as if it was smiling. I saw rows of razor-sharp teeth that could tear through bone like paper. I practically flew to the campsite and only stopped when I saw my best friend Allison. When I made it to her, I cried at her feet, breaking down. She asked what was wrong, pointing towards the woods from where I came from. Then I blacked out. When I woke up the next day in my tent, with worried faces all around me, I explained to everyone that I saw a wolf. That's all I could say. I knew no one would ever believe what I actually saw. The third day, I stayed inside, terrified that I might see that awful creature again. Nowadays, I'm very wary of going into the woods, and I never stray too far anymore. If you ever encounter a creature like this, I advise you to run for your life as well. Abandoned racetrack. From Anonymous. I live in a semi-rural area in Vermont. It's quite peaceful, but the characters here can sometimes be unsettling. This story happened about 2 years ago, in 2020 as of writing this. It was June, and my friends and I were about to graduate high school. We were all set on going to graduation and hanging around after, but my buddy gave us all an idea. Let's go to the racetrack my cousin told me about. It looks cool. We can party there instead of going to graduation. We had all collectively decided that we were going to go. The day of the trip, we spent our time getting food, drinks, and whatever else we needed to have a good time. Around 2:30 p.m., we headed out to said racetrack. It was about an hour or so away from where we all lived, so we didn't mind the drive. On the way there, my friend drops the haul on us. Hey, this racetrack is abandoned. Not sure what's in it, but there's supposedly people in the basement. We all chuckled at this, brushing off the idea of people being held up in some abandoned racetrack. Upon our arrival, we noticed the place was massive. We parked around the basement entrance for easy escape if needed. We got unpacked and headed to the top floor. On our way in, we noticed a pillar with the words, "Welcome to Hell, Run," spray painted on it. We thought that was weird for sure, but we pushed forward. We soon made it to the 3rd floor, and we noticed we couldn't go up any further due to a collapse on the top floor. We all set up camp on the 3rd floor, and the partying began. After we all got a decent buzz going, we decided to explore the place by playing Manhunt. Mind you, this whole place was only lit by the moon, so it was pitch black in there. Me and a close friend of mine, named Susan, were finding the rest of my friends first. We started in the basement. When we entered the basement, the most foul stench hit me. It was like old books and decomposed dead things. We got farther into the basement when we began to hear feet shuffling. We thought this was one of our friends, so naturally, I made my way around the noise to surprise him and locate him. I was wrong. Fast forward a few minutes later, we noticed a mask sitting on a table. We looked at the mask and realized it was some sort of animal skin and staples made into a mask. We both thought this was disturbing and went to tell the others that we weren't alone. We got up to the 2nd floor stairs that led to the 3rd when a bottle smashed next to Susan's feet. Susan screamed. I consoled her and told her it was just our friends playing jokes on us. I looked up the stairs and, sure enough, my friend threw a bottle. He was laughing it off now. I turned in a different direction, and I nearly soiled myself. Standing at the end of the 2nd floor were 2 cloaked and masked figures. I turned to Susan and immediately told her to run. "That's not funny. Stop," she yelled. So I picked her up and physically made her look at what I saw. Then she screamed again. The chase was on. The cloaked figures started walking towards us. I then screamed to the rest of my friends that we were not alone in here. As Susan and I ran away, my friends came running down from a separate stairway and met us at the front entrance. It took me a minute to catch my breath and explain what I saw. After I said this, my friend goes into his truck, pulling out a 12-gauge Winchester shotgun. Even so, he says, "What are you talking about? There's no way that..." He was immediately interrupted by the sight of one of those figures. Holy crap! My other friend who was with us drew his pistol and handed it to me. "I'll sit with Susan. You guys go get our stuff," he said calmly. 2 more of my friends and I went back into the racetrack. We took an alternate route to the 2nd floor stairs. But on our way, we noticed a door was open. We all crept towards the door and noticed there was a light coming from inside. I kicked open that door. Inside, we found a pentagram with candles around it. Also around it was the mask I pointed out earlier. But what really messed with me was looking to my left, seeing the wall ripped apart, and as I took a closer look, above the huge hole in the wall were the words Death Leap. I looked inside that wall, and to my surprise, there was a drop all the way to the basement. We quickly left that room and grabbed our things. We exited the building, but noticed 6 to 7 figures dispersing from the side of it. They were leaving too, but we didn't care. We packed and drove away. On our way out, those same figures stopped walking and began to stare us down. We've never gone back there. All of us decided to brush it off as satanic worshippers who decided to mess with me and my friends. And I hope that's all it was. Swedish Forest, from Nicholas L. I'm from Denmark. My friend and I had planned a fishing trip deep into the Swedish forest. This was back in 2007. My friend Matthias accompanied me. We went quite deep into those woods, and we were amazed by the beautiful nature out there, not really paying enough attention to where we were or how deep we'd gone. We soon found a really nice spot to start fishing. It was this little sandy beach. We started fishing, eventually losing track of time, when at one point we discovered some footprints in the sand. We studied them closer, and they looked like bear tracks. Now, everyone always says don't run from a predator, but do you know how hard it is not to run in that situation? Well, we began to hear rustling from the bushes a few feet away from us. Matthias and I stopped in our tracks and began to listen. It was like the entire forest went silent. There we were, still holding our fishing poles, just staring at these bushes, trying to see what was in there, when suddenly a snout pops out of them. We jumped back, and we were about to run, when a bear emerged from those bushes. Shocked by this huge animal, which we weren't used to seeing back in Denmark, we began to step back. I noticed the bear didn't seem too interested in us, so cautiously and slowly, we trekked back towards where we came from, but as I said before, we did not pay enough attention to where we were going. Basically, we were a bit lost. The panic began to set in before long. We went around and around in those woods for what seemed like hours. What we didn't know was that the bear we encountered had decided to follow us the entire time. As soon as we realized we were being tracked, we became extremely scared. It was at that point we looked at each other and nodded our heads and began to run, despite the warnings we've heard from people before. We only looked back on occasion to see if the bear was closing in. I couldn't stop thinking about how I was going to die in some godforsaken woods, a long way from home. Then 2 extremely loud pops ring out through the air. It was a hunter sitting in a tree on his platform. We stopped then, catching our breaths. The hunter comes down, telling us how lucky we were that he saw us in the distance, running from a bear who was right on our trail. To think we had been that close to being eaten. We explained the whole story on how we got lost. Then he led us back on the right path to our camp. I never got his name, but to dear Mr. Hunter, thank you for saving our lives. Thing in the woods. From that.
You can't stop them all. Go!
I don't think you should necessarily be afraid of the dark, but you should definitely be aware of your surroundings when nighttime comes, or you might just encounter something very unpleasant. Despite all the bad things going on in the world, my mom and I decided it would be a good idea to go on a camping trip in northern Ontario, Canada. When she told me about this campsite, I just couldn't say no. I love the outdoors. We invited our friend too. Let's call her Phoenix. She was more than enthusiastic to tag along. On July 7th, we set off. It was a long, tiring trip, but the landscapes were breathtaking nonetheless. After driving 5.5 hours, we made it. I was so happy just to be out of the car. The first few days were great. We had a lot of fun fishing, swimming, and hiking the trails. The weather was good too. It was like a dream come true. Though after a while, we began to hear strange noises at night, usually while we were in our tent. My mother and Phoenix just brushed it off as an animal in the woods, but I felt uneasy. It didn't sound like an animal, it sounded human, but there was no logical reason for someone to be in the woods past midnight, right? I should mention that we were in a pretty remote area. We only had one neighbor beside us the whole time. They were on the right side and the noises were coming from the left. A few times by the campfire, we would hear the same noises, like feet scattering around in the woods. When I flashed my flashlight towards the noises, I wouldn't see anything, nothing peculiar. The second last night, me, my mom, and Phoenix put out the fire and turned in for the night. I had done a lot that day, so I had no trouble falling asleep. The night was peaceful, until I woke up to someone walking around outside. At first, I thought it was one of my campmates, but when I looked over, I saw them both fast asleep. I shifted around a bit, and when I did, they must have heard me and gotten scared off, because the footsteps turned into a run. They faded away into the woods. I was too freaked out to even say anything, so I just lay there in silence. I mean, I couldn't hear that person anymore. I found myself falling back asleep, which was a dumb idea, as there could have been a murderer out there. I then woke up a second time to the same noise, but this time it was closer. I nudged my mom gently and pointed towards the sound, staying as silent as possible. She mumbled something about a raccoon and fell back to sleep. The noise then stopped. I shut my eyes and hid under my covers. After a few moments of complete silence, a hand grabbed my leg. I screamed louder than I've ever screamed before, waking up both my mom and Phoenix. I kicked as hard as I could. I must have hit it, because I heard a loud grunt. Very loud, very animalistic. At first, it just stood there. I could see it, illuminated by the moonlight. I saw hooves and antlers like a deer, but it was standing on 2 legs, and the thing that grabbed me had been a hand. It was so tall and thin. Thank God it ran away again, because I was sure then that I was going to die. We packed up everything except the tent and sped out of there, despite it being the middle of the night. My mom dialed 911, telling them what happened. They had police officers go out there, checking the area. One officer even followed behind us until we left the car, to make sure we were safe. However, they found nothing of interest. I didn't sleep for the remainder of the night. I was too scared, even back at my own home. I'm just glad we got out of there alive, even if we were terrified. I always keep my guard up nowadays, and I'm never going back to that place. Not after that. To be honest, I haven't even gone camping at all since then. Always be mindful of the things around you, and be careful of what could be lurking in the dark. The Glowing Eyes, from Nina Bug, 1998. This story has stuck with me for a long time. It takes place when I was on a family camping trip. I don't remember where we were exactly. It was some spot Sarah, my mother, heard about from a friend. It wasn't a place we'd been before, but the friend, Ginny, told Sarah about it and offered us their RV to go spend a few nights there to see if we liked it. Now, something you need to know about Ginny. She was weird. Like, sits there petting a crow while sitting on the couch and having a beer while talking to people. And I'm talking about an actual crow that was mounted. Also, she was a friend of one of Sarah's co-workers at the time. So, all in all, we really didn't know her that well. But said co-worker was a very good person, and trusted by me and my parents. So I guess Sarah thought that's why we should visit Ginny in the first place. My family loved camping, and I still do, but due to living situations, I haven't in a long time. Back to the story. This camping spot was way out of the way, like Ginny had to draw a map for us to find it. It was an actual campground, but I don't remember the name anymore. It was kinda run down and gave me a weird vibe, like that feeling you get when something is off, but you have no clue what it is. Well, I was young, and I figured I just had that feeling because I'd never been there before. Now, we weren't the only people there. It wasn't like we were alone. And the area we picked to put the RV, I could see maybe 4 or 5 other spots that were being used. Now, this RV was like your basic RV in 2008. Big bed in the back, and a bunk over the driver's area. There was the couch too. That's where all the sleeping spots were. Now, I did like to climb. I was like a little monkey. So you know I took the bunk over the driving area. It also had a big window in the front for me to look out of. I could close this little curtain, but it was pretty see-through. Like if it were daylight, I could see people through it, but not clearly at all. Basically just outlines of things. We parked the RV in this spot next to the river. We used to do a lot of fishing, so I thought that would be great. I wouldn't have to carry all my fishing stuff very far. I jumped at the chance to go fishing right away. We set everything up with the RV and I was heading for the river. It was like maybe 20-ish feet from our campsite. I set up my seat and got my pole all ready, baiting the hook and all that. In doing so, I pricked my finger a lot because the darn worm was so wiggly. Then again, all worms are. So I got my hook baited, cast it out, and sat down to bait. I waited until my butt got sore, doing the usual reeling in to check to make sure there was still bait, and rebaiting when needed. You know how fishing is. During all this, I noticed a few others fishing further down. We weren't close, but not that far. I decided to be friendly and called out, "Catching anything?" A boy about my age at the time was the one that caught back.
Got a catfish about an hour ago, but nothing since.
I told him, "Well, something keeps stealing my bait." He asked,
"What bait are you using?"
Just some worms. You?"
"Chicken liver."
So we had this long-distance talk about fishing. Just because I do a little fishing does not mean I can tell you what fish it was. A bass, a catfish, a bluegill, those I can tell, but I cannot tell you if you're holding a trout or not. This boy, I'll call him Leo, was real nice about it, and showed me a little pamphlet of fish he had with him. We sat together for hours after that, talking and fishing. Leo was a really nice guy, and I wish I was still in contact with him. Anyway, Leo and his family were only 2 spots away from mine, and also along the river. The day was pretty normal after that. Once I gave up on fishing for the day, Leo asked if I wanted to come hike with him. By that point in my life, I had a cell phone, so when I asked my parents if it was okay to go on a hike with my new friend, they said yes. I packed up a bag with water bottles and a lunch, and I met up with Leo. Together, we walked to the trailhead. He told me it was his first time being at this campground too, but his uncle, who he was with, came here all the time. So, of course, I had to ask about what his uncle thought of the place. "Oh, Uncle says he loves coming here, but he gets good proof." Proof? That had me interested. Proof of what? Bigfoot, he says, but I don't think that's what it really is. I frowned. "Do you not believe in Bigfoot?" "Oh, it's not like that," Leo assured me. "I just think he's using the wrong name for it." Now I was invested. I adjusted my bag, then asked Leo, "What makes you think that? Have you seen it?" "Well, No, I haven't seen it myself, but my uncle tells me about it, Leo explained. He says it's really tall and hairy, that it has big feet and makes these weird sounds, and it has a bad smell when it's close by. So far to me that sounded like Bigfoot, but I wanted to know more before just saying that's what I thought it was. I asked him what else his uncle says about it. That's when I was thrown for a loop. Leo told me his uncle said this thing had a tail and would howl on full moons. Now to me, howling at a full moon makes me think werewolf. Of course, I don't think we have those in Iowa. I could be wrong though. The more Leo told me, the more it made me think, this sounded like a mix of things. Wolf and Bigfoot. Was that a possibility? Was he talking about a wolfman? Keep in mind I'm young at this time. I'm into learning about cryptids and folklore monsters. So I was excited about this during the day. Because when the sun is out, that stuff doesn't scare you. At least, not as much. Well, it started to scare me when we stopped to eat our lunches, and we saw just how deep we walked into those woods. We couldn't even hear the river anymore. I told Leo we should head back after we eat, and he agreed. We sat and ate, talking about hobbies and things like, how many times have you done such and such? And just things kids talk about. About halfway through eating, Leo asked me, did you hear that? I hadn't heard anything, so I shook my head. No, what did you hear? Leo listened closely but shook his head. Never mind. Probably just a deer or something. Now my hyperactive imagination instantly thought, oh heck no, that wasn't a deer. But I didn't say that. I just nodded. Besides, I hadn't heard the sound, so I couldn't say it wasn't a deer or some other animal, a normal animal. Let's just say we finished eating pretty quick and headed back. On the way back, we didn't say anything. I think both of us were trying to see if we could hear something. I'm not proud to admit it, but I did start to jog when we heard something moving behind us. You hear that? Yeah, that sounded big. Do you think someone else is out here hiking? Sure. I think we were trying to keep each other from freaking out. When we got back, we just kinda chuckled at how silly we were. What were the odds the Bigfoot, as his uncle called it, was out there watching the two of us eat lunch? That stuff happens in scary movies, not real life. Of course, when these things happen to you, you tell yourself that can't happen to you, that it only happens in movies. Well, there I was telling myself just that. I get spooked easy sometimes. We headed to our campsites. I thought about telling my parents what Leo told me about why his uncle comes to the campground, but I knew they would probably just laugh, so I kept it to myself. After I got back, David wanted to go fishing, so I spent the rest of the day fishing and then helping make dinner. Overall, my first day wasn't that bad. It was the nighttime I should have worried about. After making s'mores and cleaning up a bit, I got a shower in. And by the way, why the flipping flop do RV bathrooms have to be so darn small? I may be short, but I'm round, and that shower barely fit me. Anyway, when I was done, I climbed up in my bed and closed the little curtain thing. I got all comfortable, but I've always had a hard time falling asleep. I was on my side at the time, just looking out the window. I had my music playing, listening with my headphones so my parents didn't yell at me. I was basically waiting for sleep to take me. After a while, I'm not sure how long, I got a weird feeling. Don't ask me why, but I pulled off my headphones before peeking out the curtain. It wasn't a full moon, but was pretty darn close, so there was a fair amount of light. I saw what I thought were fireflies at first. Then I noticed they were way too big and staying too still. And they were kinda too high, but I've seen them get high, so that part wasn't so bad. I watched them for a moment. They just sat there for a while. I was leaning on my elbow for so long it got sore. I tried to ignore it, telling myself I was all worked up because of what Leo said. It happened all the time when I heard creepy or scary stories and stuff like that. So I told myself that's what was happening, and I rolled over. I did fall asleep at some point. I told Leo the next morning, "I think you got me freaked out yesterday with telling me about your uncle's Bigfoot." Leo was a little bit confused. "Why? Did you have a dream about it?" I shook my head. "No, but I swear I saw eyes in the trees last night. Pretty silly, huh?" Leo looked at me. "What color were they?" That caught me off guard. "What? What color were they?" I just shrugged. "I don't know, like when you shine the light on an animal's eyes at night, I guess." "Dude, you had me worked up. It was probably just my brain playing tricks or a raccoon." I think I was trying to make myself feel better at this point. Leo replied, "Don't go out at night and stay close to your campsite." Well, that both confused and scared me. "What? Why?" "My uncle says so. He says if you see the eyes, you should not go out at night." I was even more freaked out. I didn't know what to do. I just told Leo he shouldn't scare me, because I'd be freaked out for weeks because of it. Then he said, "Then let's talk about something else." I was more than happy to change the subject. We began talking about things like our pets, and we went to fish. Well, he fished and I sat with him and talked. I spent most of the day with Leo when I was there, but at night I was a wreck. I would check out from the curtain at night, seeing eyes in the trees. Finally, I told Leo to come with me and went to check where I would see the eyes at night. We walked into the weeds and trees. At first we saw nothing, but then we saw where the grass and weeds had been stomped down, like someone was standing there. And there were these scratch marks in the tree, like when you put your hand against something when you lean on it. I mean, why would something just claw a tree like that for seemingly no reason? I looked at Leo. "What's this?" I pointed at those scratches. Leo shook his head. I got uneasy and decided to get back to my campsite. We spent the day in camp. We didn't even go to the river. I don't know. I just felt like I should be close to the RV in case I had to run. I'm not a fast runner, and I sprint, not run. That last day there was just spent shifting around and glancing at the trees while trying to talk about something else. My family left the next day, but that last night will stick with me forever. I checked for the eyes again that night, which I had started doing every night for the past few nights. This time I didn't see any eyes. Was it gone? I'd seen them every night until then, so I thought I was safe. I went to close the curtain, but I saw something out of the corner of my eye. Keep in mind, I was already jumpy. I looked and saw something huge near the river. It was covered in what appeared to be fur, and I saw a tail. I got real scared then. So, as any smart child would do, I closed the curtain and pulled the blanket over my head. I didn't sleep at all that night. I heard something outside a few times, but I stayed under the blanket. I was too scared to look. What if it saw me? What would it do? What even was it? When I got out of bed the next morning, I didn't even get dressed. I walked out in my pajamas, which was a big shirt that covered my shorts. I looked around and saw prints. These prints looked like a mix of people's feet and a paw. I knew then it was not my imagination that night. We packed up our camp and I told Leo goodbye. We never went back. My family preferred our usual campground to that one, but I still wonder what that could have been. And what did it want? Was there more than one of them out there? Or was there only one? Maybe it was a family unit. It didn't do damage to anything physically, except that tree, of course. Paralyzed with fear. From Rachel 20002. I'm 16 years old, and all my life I've never had sleep paralysis, though my mom and her mom had before. I always thought maybe I would be lucky and it wouldn't happen to me. Well, not too long ago, my grandma wanted to go camping with me, my sister, and my aunt. We planned on leaving Thursday and would be coming home on Sunday. I was honestly really excited. I hadn't been camping since the year before, and I was up for what sounded like a fun 3-day weekend.
Jesus, Strauss.
We went camping in this secluded forest. The rangers had previously warned us about bears and wolves, since my aunt and I had brought our dogs. We set up our tent, and by then it was already dark. I was tired and cold. It was a chilly 39 degrees that night. We had some dinner and everything seemed fine, but once in a while I would feel like something was watching me. I shook it off, ignoring it, thinking I was just letting my sister's stories scare me. I must have woke up around midnight, close to 1 in the morning, to the sound of crunching leaves outside our tent. I was trying to tell myself it was nothing to worry about, trying to go back to sleep. But I had this sudden urge to roll off my air mattress and onto the floor, where my sister was asleep. I was rolled up in my sleeping bag, and all I could see was the darkness of the inside of my blankets. After a while, though, the sound came back, and this time, it seemed to have stopped right by my head. My breathing began to falter. I had no clue who or what this was, or what they wanted. I tried to steady my breathing, trying to pretend I was sleeping. All of a sudden, after my sister's soft snoring, I heard a growl. It was low and seemed like a warning. At first, I thought it was a bear. Perhaps we had upset it. This suspenseful scenario went on for about 5 minutes, and by then I was having enough of it. But that was when I realized I couldn't even move. I could not will any of my body to move except my foot. My aunt's bed was right where my foot was moving. I tried nudging her bed, but I forgot she was a deep sleeper like my sister. I nudged her bed over and over again, hoping she would wake up. After a few seconds, I finally regained my voice. "Sharon, I think something's outside growling," I called out, hoping she would hear me. After a few seconds of me trying to get her to wake up, my grandma woke up on the other side of the tent. She was already up because of her Charlie horse in her leg. She stood from her cot, and I was already standing up by that point, shaking and crying. My grandma shined her flashlight in my face. She then said to me, "You look pale as a ghost." She then insisted I should move my air mattress to her room and just stay there for the rest of the night. By now, my sister was awake because of my commotion. After lying down, I explained to my grandma what happened. She then said that we should pray. So we did. After that, I felt so much better. But the rest of the night, I was on edge and shaking horribly. The next morning after I got up, I checked outside where my head was, and I never did find any tracks of any kind. It was like it all happened in my head, or at least I hoped it did. I have no clue what happened to me that night, but I'm still on high alert, and I'm afraid to sleep at night sometimes. It seems like I hardly get enough sleep, and I still think I was visited by something supernatural, like a hellhound. Thank you for listening to my story. The Monsters of Bear Creek, from John N.K. I have divorced parents, and my life, since I was just a year old, was always back and forth. One visit to my mom's house was particularly scary to me, not because she abused me or anything, but because of the creature that I encountered during our trip. I was about 12 then, and we were going camping down to Bear Creek. I was already scared of bears. I mean, I had zero knowledge of survival, or how to determine what type of bear I was looking at, if I did see one. So I was pretty nervous. There was a camping spot right next to a lake about a mile from Bear Creek. It was the perfect spot to camp. Good sightseeing, perfect fishing spot, and most importantly, peace and quiet. Now, forests aren't always quiet. There are bugs, birds, and sometimes animal calls. But after 2 or 3 hours of being there, I got used to the constant noises. I liked it, in a way. Eventually, it was time for bed, so we all helped out cleaning up. putting away the marshmallows, putting out the fire, and picking up the trash. After that, we all went into the camper, got our sleeping bags, and went to sleep. At about 3:17 in the morning, I know because I remember looking at my watch, there came a loud rustling noise near my bed from outside. It was like someone or something was dragging something. I slept in the pop-out bed, so you could probably hear everything from outside. I felt a sort of fear mixed in with curiosity, and I went to check it out. I thought it was a bear or an elk, something that would be worth finding. I peeked through the kitchen window, and I almost passed out. There was what looked to be an elk, but it had been torn to shreds. Organs, bones, and muscle pieces everywhere. Then there was this enormous creature, practically bouncing around the elk's corpse. It had snow-white skin, long arms and fingers, short legs, and worst of all, its face, which was absolutely disgusting. It had yellow eyes with these pupils that were so big I almost couldn't see the yellow parts unless it moved its eyes. It had no nose, but it did look like it had a nose before at some point. And its mouth was like looking into a bad dream. It was covered in blood, its lips stretching ear to ear, not a smile. And lastly, its teeth were almost like 3-inch knives. They were so large, the creature couldn't close its lips around it. They were only half covered. I just stood there looking at this thing, my heart pounding. If I could describe it as a 12-year-old, it would resemble SCP-096 in the scariest way possible. I realized that it was feasting on this elk, bouncing to a different area of the carcass every couple of seconds. It was circling it, slowly but surely devouring it all. Every time it moved its head, I could see its jaw open so wide, almost a full 90 degrees, and as the jaw lurched forward to take another bite, it shrieked. Its cry was a mix between an eagle and a human screaming. It was something terrible. The shriek made me want to just wake up from this horrid dream. But I realized this was no dream, no nightmare. After about 5 minutes of my heart pounding, its bouncing rotation of its feast led it to the elk's head. But before it took another bite, it looked suddenly in my direction. I made direct eye contact with it. I felt this overwhelming feeling of dread and fear. I couldn't break eye contact with it. I realized something else then. It wasn't angry or aggressive. It didn't want to attack me or attempt to. Instead, it seemed to be happy. It seemed gleeful about its feast, and that it wasn't alone for dinner. I took a deep breath. Something came over me, compelling me to go outside. Before I knew it, I was walking outside the camper. The creature jumped back a little at my presence when I opened the door, but then it became curious of me and slowly walked over. I stood my ground, although this thing could easily destroy a moose. I looked at its eyes again. The creature looked so deadly and violent, and yet behaved so docile. That's what I thought, at least. Within 2 seconds of me thinking that I was going to be safe, it opened its mouth and screamed right in my ear. I should have stayed in the camper. I closed my eyes, accepting what was about to happen. Then I heard a gunshot. Something heavy fell to the ground. I opened my eyes. That creature lay dead before me on the pine-needled floor, a bullet hole through its head. I turned and I saw a hunter in the woods, a man who had just seen me nearly die. The hunter walked over to me, kneeling down to my level. He had a look of exhaustion and stress on his face. He told me that I had almost become free, and that wasn't the only one out here. He then dragged the thing away, and I didn't get a chance to ask him what it was. A few hours later, everyone else was awake. I tried to tell them what happened, but they didn't believe me, probably thinking I had a nightmare. But I have a feeling that I scared them pretty well anyway. beware the monsters of Bear Creek. Although they might make you think you're safe, you never are.
Problem with the release mechanism.
No surprise there.
Yeah, I'll let you know when it's fixed.
The Backwoods of the Boundary Waters. From Primate 5. During the month of July in 2022, a few friends of mine along with their dads were going on a trip into the Boundary Waters. The Boundary Waters are a huge expanse of totally natural woods, stretching for hundreds of miles. In between these woods are thousands of lakes with small land bridges that we call portages, in between the forests. We packed about 200 pounds of gear for 5 people total. We fit that onto a 3-person canoe and a 2-person canoe. Before the trip started, I was already nervous of these lands. Due to my native heritage, I've heard many stories about evil spirits and tricksters like the Wendigo, Skinwalker, and Iktomi. Being in their territory of origin was nerve-wracking, along with the knowledge of these spirits enjoying messing with mixed bloods like myself. Starting out at Snowbank Lake, we canoed, portaged, and camped our way deeper and deeper into the woods of the Boundary Waters. It started when we were at the deepest point of our journey, about 15 miles in. My friends Jay and S had been stung by a wasp and wanted to go back to camp, and were discussing the matter. But me being terribly afraid of wasps and insects, I was already gone, sprinting about 15 yards away from them. I knew they would probably be heading back to camp soon to grab medical supplies for their stings, but then I heard a noise that chilled me. A strange, almost uncanny version of what sounded like Jay's voice. All I heard was, "Hey," in Jay's soft but commanding voice, warped by something I didn't know. But it came from the opposite direction they were. I froze, feeling goosebumps going up and down my body in waves of fear. Tears welled up in my eyes, and the forest became almost completely silent, except for Jay, S, and their dads talking in the